Okay, so welcome to Trauma Informed Marketing. My name is Nisi, and I'm actually a public health nurse. I started off in first geriatrics, and then I moved into emergency readiness. While in emergency readiness, I realized there was a huge need for communication in the mental health space. And so I started to move my career into that. So I do a lot of behavioral health things. Um, and how does a nurse get into digital marketing or marketing and communications? Just to give you an idea of how old I am, a long time ago, American Heart Association in the DC chapter, called in their volunteers and said, "Hey, does anybody know how to work this Facebook page thing?" Just to date myself a little bit, and I was like, "Sure, I can. I think I can manage that." And I was hooked because I realized just how critically important it is to properly communicate and market, especially for nonprofit organizations. Our messaging and what we do and how we do it is so different from the much more transactional, buy it, spend it, visit type of businesses. And so, one of the things that's really important to me is that organizations have tools that they can use, because just because you are in a nonprofit organization, let's say for mental health, does not mean that your marketing and communications team have geared experience in what that looks like, the mental health space. And so I really wanted to start this training just to make sure people were aware that there's resources available to them, even if your communications team don't have a mental health or behavioral health background or social service background or nonprofit background. And it really spans any type of work that you do. And we'll walk through what that looks like for just different industries. So if you would, even if you would just drop in the industry that you're in, the nonprofit industry that you're in, because I like to use real world examples instead of just kind of making up the ones that I already know. And that also will help you, stay engaged and ask questions. Okay. I will turn my chat box off and back on every now and then. So I'll play catch up with questions, but you're more than welcome to unmute, stop me, and ask a question as we're doing the workshop. Okay. So really the point of this is just to make sure that everybody understands what it means to have trauma-informed marketing. It's not just marketing, it's also communications, right? Internal communications as well. And how to really represent the audience that you're speaking to, whether it is the constituents that you serve or funders or donors or whatever that looks like. You need to be mindful of how you're talking to them and what you're saying, because it does have a ripple effect. You never know who is going to see what you post or share or send out. And so it's really important to kind of do your due diligence to make sure that you have a trauma-informed approach to your marketing. And I like to say trauma-informed marketing is just creating a lens. It's a lens that you put all of your marketing and communications through before you actually send it out into the world. Okay? So these are the kind of highlights of what we're going to cover: just the impact of triggering language, creative and inclusive representation, how to find current and appropriate language, and then what it looks like to align all of that with an ethical lens. And then I'll share where you can get some resources. So, but before we get into any of that, it's so important that you understand your audience. Who are you talking to, and what are you talking to them about? And what is it that you want them to do, right? So you should have at least two types of audiences that you're speaking to and your marketing and communications. And I say two, but a lot of people have 3 to 5. So you obviously have the community that you serve. Who are they? Where are they? Are they just on Facebook? Are they on Twitter? Are they on LinkedIn? Like, where are they at? And then you also have your donors, Who are they? Where are they? Um, Making sure that you understand that not every type of post is appropriate for every type of platform. Then you have your internal communications when you're talking to your staff. I've seen a lot of kind of briefings or internal newsletters that are almost condescending, right? You're trying to educate the subject matter experts that are frontline on things, and it just comes off very condescending. And so just knowing who you're talking to and how you're talking to them, and also what it is that you want them to do, is really important. It's also important to know not just the targeted constituents that you are helping, but your community in general. So the community that you're serving, is it in a political space? Is it in a transitional space, right? So I might have a program that offers treatment for substance use disorder, but I know that being in transition or housing are also parts of that community. So know the community that you serve, not just the program beneficiaries, right? This is also important before you kind of get started in your trauma-informed marketing. So I just want to take a second. I want to give everybody a chance to kind of grab a sheet of paper, write a line down the middle, and think about some of the things that you have seen or heard that are triggering. Maybe not just from, your organization, but from other organizations. And you can either blurt them out, or you can drop them in the chat. And I'll give everybody just a minute to do that. What triggering thing have you seen or heard? And it doesn't have to be something that your organization has done. It can be something that you've seen another organization do. Yes, definitely. Definitely, Susie. Yeah, committed suicide happens a lot. In a better place. Yeah, God's hands, definitely. What else have we seen? Seen or heard? I know you got it in you. Yes, definitely. White savior language. Yep. Definitely parents and adults. Yes, fat phobic messaging. Yeah, definitely. They're all around us. They're all around us. Sorry about my dog. Most of the books that are sold today are self-help books, because a lot of times they perpetuate a cycle. So it's not so much that the self-help book is bad, but it feeds into a fear right? And when you feed into a fear, then you can get people to, or you can manipulate behaviors. And so a lot of times we have triggering images because we're manipulating what somebody's perspective is on something to get them to do what it is that we need for them to do. So I'll give you an example. I apologize for my dog. I'll give you an example. When you think about, um, a hospital, let's say St. Jude, what is it that you first think about when those commercials come on? What is the thing that comes to mind when you think about St. Jude or any children's hospital? What images do you see? Sorry. He's a puppy in training and there's somebody walking in front of my house. So he's barking. Apologize for that. So maybe not St. Jude. What about animal shelters? Typically, what images do you see for animal shelters? Oh, there we go. Yes, sick children who are pleading, sick kids, possibly end stage. Yes, exactly. Well, why don't we talk about the doctors? Why don't we talk about their credentials? Why don't we talk about, the technology or the, medications or the wraparound services, because those images of those children in that space manipulates us to want to do something, which is give. Unfortunately, think about the mother who has just lost their child to end stage, cancer, right? So it's really important that we're mindful. What else can we show instead of these triggering images? Because what I want you to remember is triggering images have this impact that is kind of a ripple effect, right? So it's not just the image itself, it's also the trigger. So the mom sees the image that reminds her of the child she just lost, and the other two children are at home, and now the mom has shut down and she can't take care of the other two children. It has a ripple effect, and it doesn't really provide us with anything beneficial that we couldn't provide some other way, right? And so it's really important to be sensitive, supportive, and empowering. One of the things that I always use as an example is when someone is nervous about flying or they have a fear of flying, as soon as they get on the plane, what is it that the flight attendant does? She says, if we crash like this, you want to use that. If your seatbelt isn't working, you're going to fall out. If we crash over water, this is what's going to happen. That does not help me if my anxiety or fear of flying, right? What would help me is if the pilot came out and said, just want to let you guys know, we're doing all of our safety checks. We have 125 safety checks that we do every single time before we take off. I've been flying for 27 years. You have seasoned crew on board. Those things are sensitive, supportive, and empowering because I'm speaking to what will make me feel better, and I'm not manipulating fear. The reason that the triggering images pop up is because you need to manipulate, and that can have a really horrible backlash on your marketing, especially if the wrong person sees your messaging. Think about a funder for your children's program and you have just blasted children that don't look well, and they just recently lost a child. Are you really going to get from them what it is that you need? Or do you want to say these are the supportive things that we put in place to encourage them to help you grow that support system? So just keep that in mind. So I would definitely hold on to a sheet of paper, go through some of your previous posts, messaging, communications, see if there's anything that's triggering, and figure out a way that you could Possibly change it to sensitive, supportive, or empowering. Or yes, disabled, exactly, differently abled, yes, definitely. There's always a better way of saying it, and here's the thing, no one is perfect. Even I will probably say something today that is completely wrong. The goal is to create a lens, a trauma-informed lens before you put anything out. You should not be the only person looking at something, reading something, that's gonna go out, into the world, especially into digital space, without having that trauma-informed lens. So that impact of triggering language is huge, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's just going to be, a bad day for somebody. You could literally send someone into a spiral, psychological spiral that could be weeks. And so you want to be mindful that not only are your words appropriate, but also your visual assets are appropriate. Be careful what you put out and how you put it out and how it's applied. We always say empathy, empowerment, and collaboration. I will tell you that empowerment is starting to be removed from that space, because what it's saying is, I believe somebody had texted that kind of savior complex. What it's saying is, you don't have empower, we have to give it to you. And so again, that's just about keeping up with, um, trending vocabulary, what is appropriate vocabulary. And we want to make sure that when you are putting things out for people to screen, to go through that lens, that you're actively listening to what it is that they're saying. Sometimes we put it out there just to kind of check a box or be performative, but really pay attention to their response, because it might give you some insight as to why your messaging isn't going in the direction that you want it to go, or why people aren't connecting to the information that you want them to connect to. So, how does it make you feel to see this big and bold on the screen? Probably threw a lot of people off. Yes, definitely uncomfortable. Think about the person that's reading a, 10 or 15 word text quote on top of an image. The image looks like assault. This is what they see. They don't see your services. They don't see your compassion. They don't see you doing the work to provide help or resources. They see this word, and this word can be a trigger. There's other ways to show that you are aware of what's happening without traumatizing the people or the audiences that you're sending this communication to. Please don't forget your internal staff as well. I think sometimes we might do a better job in what we send out externally. And internally, we have training modules that are, 10 years old, that are using really poor terminology. And so you just have to be mindful. Everybody that you meet has walked a different path, and they're all dealing with something. And most people don't know about it, especially internally. Your coworkers probably don't know if you have experienced any, type of trauma. Be mindful of what that looks like and the words that you say. This also means in the texts that you share, the emails that you share, jokes around the water cooler. Just be really careful with that. So when you are doing your active listening, what you're listening for is how it makes people feel. And Susie, you were, great. Wendy, fear, violation, trauma, life-changing. I'm listening to that, and I want to make sure that these are not the things that I do when I put out my messaging. I also want to have respect for boundaries. So keep in mind, it might be an approved, current terminology that we're using right now, but does it disrespect the boundaries of the community that we're serving? Is it too much? Have we gone too far? now with social media, a lot of people can hide behind a screen, right? And so are we respecting some of those boundaries for them? And then also think about ways that you can increase your empathy and increase your collaboration. Do you have someone that can talk to you about your marketing and communications that has lived experience? They're going to know better than someone that has never had that lived experience, right? This is why we have peers, because we know the value of someone that has lived experience in our nonprofit space. Collaboration is going to be key, especially if you have multiple programs that cross different types of industries, or if you are working with several partners. On a communication level, are y'all speaking the same language? Right? I know a lot of organizations that are changing their names. They probably had the word abuse in their name, and now they're figuring out either taking it out altogether or just use instead of abuse. But being mindful of what that looks like in your collaborations. It's also important when you think about funding. Right now, funders are getting smarter and smarter, and they're wanting, more proof that you are, not doing harm. And so sometimes that looks like if you're collaborating with another organization or MOU or whatever, are they in alignment with your ethical lens, right? Are y'all speaking the same language? So what is it that you can do now for this section? Identify those triggering languages and digital assets that you have and figure out how to create more inclusive alternatives. It's really important to understand what's triggering and what's not. I suggest if you belong to a nonprofit group or consortium or anything like that, peers that are maybe not in your same lane, bring them in on that conversation. Figure out if there's anything that you're doing that you can do differently. Also, take a look at your images. Sometimes the images that we use, we don't realize it, but they're not really great images. What can we do differently? And I've got some examples in a second. And then you really want to incorporate principles of trauma-informed care. So I'll give you an example of a physical space trauma-informed initiative. If your facility is trauma informed, what you will do is you won't create barriers between the person that you're serving and the door, right? So they always have the opportunity to leave that space. You are mindful of the waiting room. What does that look like? You're mindful of bathrooms. You're mindful of parking garages. You're just mindful of the physical space that you're in. As a marketing and communications person for your nonprofit, it's really important to be mindful of what you are bringing people back to by your images, right? So posting images of a dark alley, if you're talking about, transition or housing, is probably not helpful. And then you want to figure out what are some strategies that you can increase in your collaboration efforts. And this one, might take time, right? So this one might be, okay, we want to make sure that we have collaborated with people that share the same values as us, not just someone that can provide this, the services that are complementary to us. So be mindful of what that looks like. So when you see this image, how does it make you feel? Yeah, definitely. This image has been used over 250,000 times for various reasons, whether it's for digital marketing, publications, internal, external, but over 250,000 times. Exactly, Wendy. Absolutely. Men are not always the aggressors. Yep. Flashbacks. You instantly are taken to a place that's not safe, that's not productive. Even if it didn't directly happen to you, it takes you to that memory, whether it's you, somebody on your team, or the constituents that you're serving. Same thing. This one was used over 180,000 times. This is very objective, right? It's kind of clean, clear. The man is the aggressor, the woman is being abused. Um, and what happens is the more objective you are, the bigger the trigger could be. This one is subjective because it forces you to create a narrative to go with this image. We don't know why she's in that position. We don't know what has happened to her. We don't know where the story starts or begins or ends. And so now we have to use a narrative to go along with this image. This image still creates a response, but it's not on the same level as the images before. So it's really important to be mindful of the images that you're using and what that looks like. Again, who are you talking to? What are you saying to them? And what is it that you're asking them to do? If you're asking for alignment, does this perpetuate the type of alignment that you want to have? Probably not. I think in real life, when I think about the news, they want to find the worst case scenario to report on because they're trying to grab attention. That is not what you want to do in nonprofit trauma informed marketing. You want to let your narrative speak for itself, and you want to connect and associate with the right type of alignment. So, what does it look like to kind of create that inclusive and representative material? I'm certain that we've all used, the multiple hands or, different ability type images. And yeah, those are okay and they're safe. You can be transparent and you can be representative without being triggering. If you notice in the slide presentation, I'm using kind of greenery plants as my default images, as opposed to using the images that we typically see when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and representation. So here's another example of what's the best image, right? And you first have to figure out what is it or who is it that I'm talking to? What is it that I want them to know? And what is it that I want them to do? So in this top image here, with the doctors holding hands, okay, is it cheesy, corny? Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. But if the narrative is to speak to other doctors that you want to hire, bring in, collaborate with, this is straightforward. It tells me that we're talking about teamwork and the medical staff, right? This image in the top right-hand corner, however, kind of starts to violate that boundary. Like, are we talking about somebody being sick and needing oxygen? And what does that look like for them and that person? And same with down here. It seems like it's an okay image because it seems like it could be a family member or friend being supportive of a loved one in a hospital. If you use your trauma-informed lens, is this the most appropriate image that you can provide, right? Or is there a better image, better narrative that you can give to the audience that you're speaking to? And then the one in the corner on the bottom left. Be careful about HIPAA violations. You would be surprised how many times a marketing communications team wants to go out into programs and take, live footage of what's happening. I see a lot of organizations that will do tours of their facilities, and they let the people that they're giving the tour take photos. Be careful of those boundaries. Be mindful of what it looks like when you are trying to craft a story or a narrative, that you're not crossing that line. So what can you do? So understand what inclusion and representation looks like for your organization. You will not be able to represent everyone, and in fact, that should not be your goal. Being inclusive and representation does not mean you fill every single bucket across the platform, because you won't be able to. And also, it means that you will inevitably leave some buckets unfilled. So when you're talking about who are we talking to, how can we be inclusive to them, how can we provide that representation, identify who it is that you're talking to. That's who you need to provide that representation to. Okay. It's also important to know that intersect. So I think a lot of times about our veterans. I went to a grand opening for a veteran facility, and they had a ramp that was on the side of the building that was awkward to get up. And then you had to walk from the side to the front. It was a fairly large building. And then the button to get the automatic door to open was in an awkward place. Um, so that intersection of veterans that have different mobility, accessibility challenges was not thought about. So you have a veteran facility, but you didn't think about that intersection of, who you're serving and what that looks like. Again, you can't serve everyone. Also, keep in mind that you need to create an aesthetic of what it looks like. So if you can't use actual people, or let's say you're talking about your board and your board is not diverse or doesn't match the individuals that you serve, maybe not use real life images at this point and use some other opportunities. I forgot who had said it, but that white savior thing, you don't want to have a board that looks one way and then the community that you serve looks a different way, kind of in the same picture with that white savior complex. You want to make sure that you are mindful. Racism, diversity, all of those things come with trauma and can be a trigger. So we don't want to just think about, assault or neglect as things that can have a trigger, but also race and diversity. Okay. All right, so I'll pause for a second. We've got a few more slides to go. And I'll just ask you if you have any questions, or if you have any situations or scenarios that you are working through within your organization that you want to chat about. All right, we'll do a 5 Mississippi countdown. And you can also direct message me. I won't tell people who you are, what you do. I'll be generic in my response.
I guess I do have a question.
Sure.
Um, I'm here at the invitation of one organization, but I help out a lot of different orgs. I forgot my camera's over here. Because I should put you on this other screen, but
You're good.
I've been for some initiatives for the city because I'm the Office of Arts and Culture Commissioner for District 5, which is a Pleasant Grove area. I've been creating some are producing some events for, and next week is the first one for the parents of special needs adults. And someone earlier said something about the word special being a triggering word. And in my community, we're still, that's the language, as far as the parents go, that's the language that we still seem to be using. So there's actually two questions I think about, like, there, when you say special needs, sometimes those are physical and sometimes they're developmental, cognitive, and sometimes there's a variety. So neurodiverse doesn't really work for me when I say neurodiverse, that when I describe my son, because he is, we could say he's high functioning, but he is developmentally delayed. And so I find when we're kind of, for that community, and also for that community, I'm really trying to serve parents, not just, and when I say not just, not necessarily caretakers, I'm really gearing it towards parents because I feel like there's a certain amount of guilt and trauma associated with with that particular community. That's a little different than if you are a caretaker that has come in later on. And I'm just, anyway, so I'm finding myself like struggling, I guess is what I'm saying, to not offend anyone or not to be exclusive, but also to find a way to minister to, or I use the word minister even, and sometimes I'm concerned about that because it sounds like a church word. And I said, search your hearts in one of the meetings earlier today. And I was like, oh, that's church language. And that could be triggering to folks. And you know what I mean? So anyway, I just kind of putting that out there, like, what are best practices for that? Like, especially if I'm also a mom of an adult who is differently abled. But when I say that, I feel like I can give more information about my son, but does everyone want to hear the long 5-minute explanation or?
Yeah. No, I think that's so appropriate. I think a lot of people freeze and they're like, I don't even know what to say because I know I'm going to offend somebody. And yeah, there will be somebody that is absolutely offended all the time, no matter how much we research, collaborate, survey, best terminology. There will always be someone that does that. So here's my recommendation. One, create an internal term list or like vocabulary list, right? And say, here are all the words that we feel are representative, inclusive, non-triggering, non-traumatic. Please take a look at them. If there's any that make you feel a certain kind of way, don't just say no to it, but tell us why, right? That's that whole collaboration and getting feedback or, paying attention to the answers that you get. Because that is your audience that you are serving. You're not going to be able to serve the world every time you put something out on social media or newsletter or, for an event, but you need to know what your audience is wanting from you. Get them engaged, get their buy-in. Have those safe words, terms, sayings, things like that. Make that part of your communication plan so that when you are auditing for next year's communication or marketing, you can say, all right, we're auditing to make sure that we're using the right words, right? Like I can remember committed suicide was it. Then we went to successful or unsuccessful. And we thought we were doing so much better than committed. And that ended up being 10 times worse, right? So you want to audit the audience that you're talking to
Mhm.
internally and externally, get their buy-in, make it part of your communication plan. So when you need to put out marketing, communication, messaging or whatever, you're speaking the language that the majority of the people have said this is what we're okay with.
Okay. And so I'm just going to kind of repeat what you said, just so I'm clear, because I also I'm here also for Pegasus Media Project, and they serve for the mentorship program. We serve, a diverse group of folks, the LGBTQ community and neurodiverse individuals. And so neurodiverse does work there, I think. But what you're saying is like whenever we have an applicant cohort, we can say these are the words that we're using when we are describing the people we're serving. Tell us how you feel about these
Yeah.
words, and if there are some that you would like us not to use. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. And
Okay.
why? And
And
why?
why?
Yeah,
Okay.
and why? Because when you're actively listening, you really want to understand not just at a surface level, like, oh, people don't like that, but why they don't like it. Because I can say DEI, and what some people hear is race, right? And
Right.
so you want to make sure why they don't like it. I don't like the term DEI. Why don't you like it? Because it just means race. So you want to have both of those levels of
Got it.
understanding. Yeah,
Okay.
great
Thank you.
question. Thank you. All right. And in the chat, we have balance between showing the need for services and not offending those serviced. Okay. So think about that example with the airplane that we talked about, right? Um, are we talking about the services that we provide, or are we talking about the fear um, associated with those services or the negative impact associated with those services, right? So maybe instead of talking about the individuals being served or the type of individuals, because we're a data-driven world, right? We want to know the demographics of the individuals being served. Maybe let's talk about a different type of demographic. So let's talk about the success rate. So I know that there's a high school mentorship program. When they first started out, they only talked about the failure rate of the high school students in their district. That's all they talked about. We need your help because we, are dealing with an XYZ failure rate in our district. Well, when the numbers started to get better, they really needed to change their narrative because they really needed to focus on here's what we've been able to do because of the services and programs. And here's on the positive side, our success rate because of these services provided, right? So now we're not looking at the underserved or, empowering people, but we're looking at here's the outcome, here's the impact, here's what's happening because of our services. And so it's just a switch from kind of the negative or deficit talk to that abundance talk. Like, here's what we can do. We need 10,000 more dollars because here's what we've already done. Here's the impact. Workforce development group came in and supported this high school mentorship program. And part of that funding campaign was about economic growth and development within that community. We get them through high school, the workforce development group gets them skill trade. And now you have individuals that stay in our community and help us with economic impact. Much more better, way to communicate the success and services than to just talk about, the things that aren't working and who they're not working for. Great question. All right, I'm gonna go to the next one. How to handle Mother Father's Day language. Mm, yeah, absolutely. So I've seen things where it says Mother's Day, and then right below it, it says grandmas, aunties, friends, neighbors, welcome to. And then I've heard people change it to other things instead of Mother's Day. So maybe what you don't need to do is celebrate Mother's Day or Father's Day, but have, special person day or guardian angel day or something completely outside of that kind of hallmark pigeonholed space, because there is sensitivity to that, especially in communities where there is a big level of transition, in that family structure. So again, I would poll your people, right, internally and externally. What is it that they're comfortable with? Do you have to do a Mother's Day? Do you have to do a Father's Day? Can it just be, I want to invite my VIP, person in my life kind of thing, and have some fun with that? Um, I've seen schools do superhero day. There's actually a national like superhero day. And what they'll do is they'll have that instead of Mother's Day or Father's Day, because then you have, is it two moms? Is it two dads? Is it, you have all of these things that can kind of spiral out of that. So I would try to operate in a different capacity so that you're not being exclusive. Because what if it's my grandmother that's raising me versus my mom, what that looks like. But pull your people internally, externally, and then think outside the box to be more inclusive. Okay. Any others? All right, keep it moving. All right. So we just talked about literally making sure that we have the appropriate language. So I'm going to exit out of this really quick, and I will give you guys all the links in the email. So this is CDC's, their gateway to health communication. So it's not just talking about like healthcare, but it's talking about inclusive language and what to use, creating that health equity lens. This is a great resource. So let me drop that into the chat for everyone. This also gives you those preferred terms and inclusive images that we talked about. Now, I will say this, they're not always as up to date as we would like for them to be. So just be mindful that it might not work in your space, but this is why knowing, the world that you work in is so important. So here they have some best practices, things to avoid, things to include. And this is what I love because this is timeless. Evaluating an image, right? So context matters. I love that because when we think about those three images where we were talking about, domestic abuse, right? Or partner abuse, evaluate the images that you have. We have a lot of images that go out in Evergreen, or we just pull them from Canva, and think about what it is when you send that image out, right? Who's the audience? How will it be used? Where is it going to be used? And then do they have diverse representation? This is also another great place to start if you're looking for something. I actually am going to send you guys a spreadsheet that have all these links in it too. But I recommend creating something that goes into your communication plan based off some of this information. Not everything fits for everybody, but at least it gives you a starting point as to what you should be saying or maybe should not be saying, just helping you build that lens. And then, so preferred terms, I love this page. Some of them are outdated. I wish they would update sooner than later. However, I love this page because it breaks it down by category. So for example, you have corrections and detention, you have disability, you have drug, substance use, healthcare access, homelessness. And I know we're, saying without housing now. So that's what I mean when I say some of it, you just have to do your due diligence to make sure it's appropriate. Lower socioeconomic status. I think this is probably the one that should be used the most because we often are saying underserved, and it's not really we're putting the burden on the organization, right? And so you want to make sure that you are mindful of where you're placing the burden. So another example of that is instead of saying they were slaves, you would say they were enslaved, right? And it's just a flip in your grammar to make sure that the burden doesn't sit with the victim of the situation. Okay. This as well. Right now, I know that we're trying to get away from mental illness and we're just talking about mental health or mental health challenges. Again, make sure you have subject matter experts and peers in the room when you're developing that preferred language. Okay. And then even this immigration, I mean, it just covers pretty much every group that you can think of. So you can find the ones that are most appropriate for you and use that as a starting point for your preferred terms or preferred language document. There are some reclassifications happening for race and ethnicity right now. And so I don't want to say that this is not a reliable source. I just want to say that be mindful of the date that these things are published. A lot of times when you're talking about CDC or other organizations, the publication is sometimes a year or two behind, and a lot can happen in a year or two. So I always check to see if there's any amendments or updates. And it literally just goes through so many spaces, right? Some other resources would also include working with the subject matter experts in that space, right? So when we're thinking about sexual orientation or gender identity, a lot of communities have chambers, cohorts, things of that nature, groups. Reach out to them, just be transparent and say, hey, we want to do the best job possible with our marketing and communications to find you or to connect with you so we're not being offensive to anyone. And I guarantee they will be excited and happy to collaborate because they are living in that experience and they can tell you, what you've shared or what you want to do, how it affects people or doesn't affect people. Because remember, the trigger has a ripple effect. It's not just in that moment or what's happened, it's all the things that happen because of it. So again, working partners, community. This one I am still working on. Stakeholder is such an easy term, right? Like decision maker, stakeholder. But what happens is that appropriate for my audience? Maybe not. Maybe I need to, figure out another way to do that. Okay. And then I want to talk, well, let me go to the
Can I ask you real quick, what
absolutely.
word you would use except for stakeholder? To me, it seems as the OAC commissioner, I've been asked to get stakeholders to a meeting, and then in some places I feel like that works. To me, I was like stakeholders. Even I was like community members. Is that what you would say? Like that's
So
what I feel comfortable saying for that, but for other things, I don't know.
I think you can be specific. So is this the leadership? Is this the executive leadership? Are these community members, community leaders? Are these the decision makers? I think you can be specific in how you identify who it is that you're talking to, for each type of, article or post or whatever that looks like, right? So that very first slide that we had, it says know the audience, because if you are talking to your constituents, you don't, or the community that you serve, I don't think that they want to hear, our stakeholders are working really hard to provide you with these services, right? And so what is it that sounds better, feels better to the audience that you're speaking to. Now, if you're talking about your leadership team and you want your board to, get some things done, it almost seems like it's an easy, way to communicate. I'm talking, to leadership. They understand stakeholders mean decision makers. Then let's say decision makers. Who are the decision makers that we need to talk to? And then does decision makers, is that offensive, right? That's probably less offensive than stakeholders, right? So I think even the word is just
Yeah.
kind of harsh.
It just kind of reminds me of Monopoly or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
The word is harsh. Yeah.
the other word I was thinking of is when you said underserved, because sometimes, I do say that word, underserved communities, because I'm trying not to put the burden on the community, but also you're saying that puts the burden on the organization. And so what else? Do you have another suggestion?
Yeah. So this one said,
Did I miss it?
no, I don't like lower socioeconomic status either.
Right.
And when you start to use, kind of nonprofit slang and things like that, it kind of loses the connection, I think. And I think you just have to be mindful of not so much identifying the deficit, but identifying the opportunity for impact or success and what that could look like. So, we like to say a system that created poverty, individuals living in a system that created poverty, individuals living in a digital disconnect space or digital divide space, right? Because it's not their fault that there's not good Wi-Fi in their
Mhm.
community, right? It's a system that has not provided the resources in that community. And so you might have to use a couple extra words, but you take that burden or that deficit off of the person or people that you are trying to create services for or benefits for. So, but yeah,
Okay, thank you.
it's a little tricky, but you definitely just spend a little time playing around with it and use it in real life scenarios. So if you were using, underserved, what else could we say? And sometimes I just grab a thesaurus and I'm just like, okay, what else can I say besides these words? What's another word for underserved? What's another word that has a positive effect besides underserved? So
Is it okay though if I'm trying to place the blame on the organization?
so I think you always
In the sense where I'm trying to say, to petition the group to say, mm, uh, you know, s- not the group I'm representing here, but when I'm saying to the city, my neighborhood has been underserved, or when I'm saying this group of folks, special needs folks or neurodiverse folks or the LBGT community has been underserved, is that, or do you say it's just not going to be beneficial in if we're trying to motivate them to serve them? I don't know. Is
yeah.
that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think we always want to flip it. We speak, nonprofits speak from a deficit, right? We speak from what we don't have, what is not available, what has been taken away. We speak from those spaces. Instead, we need to speak to the impact that it will provide by providing a Wi-Fi tower in this neighborhood. We will close the gap on the digital divide. Some of the consequences of not having that digital capacity for this neighborhood include dot, dot, dot. We don't mention anything about the children that can't do their homework, right? Because of that. When we start talking about they can't do this, they can't have that, then it's a us versus them kind of thing. And then we start to go into that manipulation thing, right? So just be mindful of what that looks like. I do like underrepresented. more than I like underserved, but I think you probably are using it because that's what's appropriate in your space. So it's not to say that everything that you say needs to be changed now. It's to say you need to have that trauma-informed lens. Ask one of the constituents or one of the members of the community that you provide these services for, how do they feel being talked about as underserved, right? How does it make them feel? Because at some point, they're not always going to be the underserved. At some point, because of the services or program that you provide, they will be able to kind of be alumni of your program. And so you don't want to pigeonhole them in this bucket of the not have nots. You want to really highlight them as the hero. They should always be the hero, and you are always the sidekick. And if you look at it like that, it kind of changes, how you talk about the individuals that you take care of. Great, great, great stuff. Any other comments or questions about that preferred terms list? Okay. Some other tools. I I'm not a reader. I like audiobooks. And so if you have the space and capacity to kind of go through some of these things, here's an amended version of what they're doing. Again, look at this date, 1997. How much has changed since 1997? A lot. So what I want you to remember is when you find a resource, you're really taking the resource to build the framework, and then you have to use your subject matter expert to make it most current, if that makes sense. We have the first group. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so this is important. So it's really important to know, how do people want to be addressed, and be ready to be flexible. Okay, I'll give you an example. Prior to George Floyd, people wanted to be addressed a certain way. After George Floyd, people wanted to be addressed a different way. So if something has happened in the industry that you are serving or the community that you are serving, take another audit. Take a step back and say, okay, let's just make sure that we're being mindful and have a good pulse on what other people are feeling about our messaging and what that looks like. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Go into the next, just a couple more slides. So let's say, for example, the service that you provide is transitional, like housing, or employment or address, or even kenneling for dogs, right? Be careful that we talked about that intersection. You're not being harmful to other communities as you're talking about, what it is that you do. So for example, the city that I'm in, years ago when I first got here, we had this huge feral dog issue, right? Like there were feral dogs everywhere, and everybody we knew was opening up a some sort of dog foster adoption, thing. But what was happening is the message that the city was sending out was, um, these dogs are going to be put to rest. Stop getting dogs, or we're going to have to put them to rest. And what we transitioned to finding programs that would spay and neuter, finding foster programs, having no questions asked drop-offs to animal shelters networking at like a round table, things of that nature. Because what we were really saying to people is, stop having dogs, adopting dogs, not spaying and neuter your dogs, being irresponsible, and then forcing the city to pay for it. And what we started to say was, we're building in different services, working with different partners in collaboration to help you if you have, maybe purchased a dog and now all of a sudden your life circumstances have changed and you can no longer take care of the dog. So we were being harmful to, the family that adopted a dog with good intention, and then for whatever reason, we're no longer able to take care of the dog and had to, make that sacrifice. So just be careful. And that's a very generic, low hanging fruit type of example, but I'm certain that you can think of, some of those intersections of what you do. We don't want to put one group down to bring another group up. Um, Also in that that link, it does talk about language justice and how to apply them. Be really careful when you are talking about specific groups and applying any type of justice, judicial components to that. I'm not sure if anybody's in that space. It's really important that you kind of just don't go there unless you're talking about it in a very positive light, right? So our jail houses XYZ individuals every year, and it costs our city, this amount of money. That's negative. That's a negative way of looking at that situation. So just be mindful of that. And then always audit and update. You want to make sure that everything that you put out is in direct alignment with your missions, values, and impact. So when you're looking at creating that, preferred term list, your vocabulary terms, your sayings, your slogans, any of those things, is it in alignment with your values? Is it in alignment with your impact? The impact part will probably help you most when we're talking about marketing and communications, because you don't want to speak from a deficit when you're talking about impact, right? Think about that high school mentorship program. Instead of saying, only 10% of high school students are graduating in this school district, say, with our program in the past year, we've had an increase by 5% of high school graduates from this district. And because of the program that we have, the workforce development has partnered with us. We have a collaboration to ... Think about the impact. Speak from the impact, right? We talked earlier about children in hospitals. Think about the impact, not necessarily the patient. So the impact is going to be that parent. I think about like Ronald McDonald House. Think about how impactful it is to say, we need funds so other parents can be supportive of their children in time of need and not have to worry about housing or work or things of that nature, instead of, this child is sick and how are you gonna, help us pay for it? It's the same money, you're going to use it however you need to, but which one is most impactful? Which one is in alignment with your values? And which one is helping you to resonate your mission, right? Your mission should be kind of a sounding board for anybody that you're speaking to. All right, so this is the ethical lens part. And so this I actually pulled. We actually have a online training module that is actually about 8 hours. So this is just kind of an abbreviated version of that, but I wanted to pull this part in as well. Your ethical framework is really about figuring out what are we saying and what are we not going to say, kind of like that preferred list. And then how does it relate to our principles, our values? This is a document that you want to create because you want to be able to say, here's what we are doing, here's what we're not doing. I'm going to show you an example, actually. Let me see if I can find it really quick. All right. So this one is for a nonprofit group for women business owners. And they're working on their diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging lens. This kind of has the same vibe as that other type of lens. Okay. So here's some of the things that they need to think about before they kind of make a move to the next step, right? So, is this in alignment with the national statement, which is this up here? Does this event demonstrate our positioning on diversity? So, replace diversity with whatever it is that your initiative is. Could we increase our efforts? So, they had a post go out for an upcoming training event, and they have 3 posts scheduled. And in each of the posts, it was all white women. Um, does that demonstrate their positioning on diversity? No. And so they wouldn't have thought about it before. They just grabbed some, generic images from Canva and went to work. And so this shows you that having this lens just forces everybody to like pause for a second and take a step back. So whenever you're ready to put something out, let's say it's a newsletter or it's an event. We talked about upcoming events. Could this event remove space for members? Can you be exclusive by having this event? We talked about the Mother's Day, Father's Day training, right? Could this event remove space? Yeah, because now we're excluding the aunt, the grandma, the caretaker, the best friend, the godmother, that kind of thing. What we do to make this more diverse or inclusive. And our example was, let's create a whole nother type of event, right? There's so many ways to kind of be inclusive without being exclusive. Um, will this event positively impact your initiative? So will hosting this event be a positive thing, or will there be more hiccups and problems or concerns or things like that that will cause other types of problems that maybe you didn't think of because we're just trying to get it done, right? Communications, marketing, we're kind of the last to know most of the time, and then we've got really short deadlines. So we're just like, get it out, be productive. And then I love this one. Does this event foster an open communicative environment? So event is a social media post, programming, photos, awards, any electronic or printed materials, documents, emails, things like that. So when we say event, we don't just mean like an actual live gathering event. And then when we celebrate this specific type of diversity, does it promote inclusion without segregation? So when we talked about that Mother's Day, Father's Day, we're promoting diversity by having both Mother's Day and Father's Day potentially, right? But is there segregation within that? Yeah. How can we be more inclusive? Right. So think about the other things that you guys produce that you send out into the world. This is what that lens will do. It will make you pause, ask a different question to be inclusive, to make sure that you are, trauma informed in your questioning. Does this offend anybody? Does this, resonate with the person or people that we're talking to? Are we placing the burden on the wrong space? Do we have a savior complex? A lot of nonprofits have a savior complex. Well, we do this for the community and we do that. Always remember that the people that you serve, they are the heroes and you are their sidekick, right? And so it will also help you change your perspective on that as well. So I think, yes, that is all. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to open it up. If anyone has any questions or concerns, or you have a scenario you want to walk through, now is the time to do that. We have plenty of time. If you are good and you love it, as long as you went and registered, you will get the recording and you will get all of the links. So let me take the record off so that we can